Jade Angelica was trained in improvisational theater, and she holds a degree from Harvard Divinity School. As a child, she was abused, and for years she blamed her mother for not protecting her. And as so often happens, later in life she finds herself to be the primary caretaker when her mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Interestingly enough, her long-standing issues with her mother amazingly dissolved into what she calls an unconditional, loving forgiveness. By the time her mother died, this is what her experience was. She tells us that she used her improvisational skills as a caretaker, and she writes about this experience in an intriguing book entitled Where Two Worlds Touch: A Spiritual Journey Through Alzheimer's. Miss Angelica couldn't have possibly imagined what life would confront her with. None of us have that eye into the future. But life will at some point, in some way or other, challenge us all. Our second reading this weekend, we hear Paul telling us that all creation is subject to futility and is groaning. Certainly, Miss Angelica had firsthand experience of the futility of creation and its groaning as she struggled to forgive her mother and care for her in her illness. In a day and an age when we are all living so much longer, many of us, probably most of us, will either be dealing with family members struggling with chronic illness or facing it ourselves. So where do we find the strength to do this? And what could possibly have given Jade Angelica the ability to work through her issues with her mother and come to that kind of an experience of unconditional, loving forgiveness? To some, I am sure this sounds impossible. But perhaps that's what this gospel this weekend is all about. Our God sows the seeds to make the seemingly impossible possible. The sower makes available to us that which we need to meet the challenges and the fragility of life. The seeds are available to us to enable us to get beyond ourselves and at times do the unimaginable. The seeds of courage, the seeds of strength, the seeds of power, the seeds of patience, the seeds of compassion, the seeds of forgiveness. I believe the challenge of this gospel is simply this: how open is our heart? How receptive are we to the grace that God sends to us? In the gospel, we see that Jesus uses soil, talks about the four different ways that we are either open or not open to his grace. The first way he talks about is the hard, packed soil, where one is too self-sufficient, too self-satisfied, too self-righteous. And the grace of God cannot penetrate us if that's how we are. The second experience he talks about is the stony ground. The grace goes in one ear and out the other. It's heard and understood, but simply disregarded. The heart is not changed. When trouble arises, faith quickly disappears. The third experience is the thorny ground, where it's welcomed, the seeds are welcomed, but the heart is so full of riches and pleasures and lusts, all the things of this world that get in the way and block God's grace. And the fourth experience is the good ground, where we hear God's word, We understand it. We allow it to penetrate our lives. The grace of God gets in and becomes a real force of strength in our lives to meet any of the challenges that the world faces us with. I have to believe that Jade Angelica's heart had to be open and receptive, had to be good soil, good ground, to enable her to get beyond her anger and resentment and move towards, and it's a process, move towards that unconditional, loving forgiveness and care for her mother that she was so angry and resentful for. Critics call her book, Where Two Worlds Touch, one of the best on Alzheimer's. Her editor, Michael Leach, editor of Orbis Books, asked her, he said to her, "What is the one thing that you hope readers get out of it? The one thing they'll take away and remember the rest of their lives?" Well, when he asked Miss Angelica this question, she paused and she thought and she said, value. The value of people with Alzheimer's and dementia, and the beauty of those who love them. She said, the book is about meeting persons with Alzheimer's and falling in love and respect for them. They give us a unique opportunity to exercise our innate compassion. We need to see them as they are, gifts from God, of value to us and to society. And finally, she said, caring for my mother brought out the best in me and in her. Caring for her mother brought out the best in her. Well, certainly caring for anyone can bring about the best in all of us. We are creatures subject to futility, and we are put on earth to love and care for one another. Yet, at times, we as humans, and we all know this and have all experienced it, we can be very cruel and abusive towards one another. But we're not born this way. We become this way when we do not tend to the soil of our lives, weeding out and letting go of all that stuff that can turn the soil of our lives hard, stony, or thorny. So the challenge for all of us every day is to constantly be checking out the receptivity of our hearts, to hear God's word and receive God's grace, so that when life challenges us, as it will, we have the substance to thrive in the midst of the challenge and allow it to bring out the best in us and not the worst. Many of you have probably seen that wonderful movie, Philomena. The true story of Philomena Lee. In 1951, a teenage girl living in Ireland became pregnant outside of marriage. She was sent to Sean Ross Abbey, where her infant son was born. And while working in the Abbey's laundry to pay off the cost of her stay, her young child was adopted by an American couple. She was not forewarned. Philomena never had the opportunity or the chance to say goodbye. She spent 50 years attempting to find her son without success, and she visited the Abbey many times and was told that there was no information available. And she discovered way too late that her son had died and his ashes were buried at the Abbey. A reporter was helping her in her trying to find her son, and he explodes with anger. But to his big surprise, Philomena looks at him and says, I have a choice as to how I will respond, and your anger must be so exhausting for you. And she looked at the head of the Abbey and she said, I forgive you. And the reporter looked at the same head of the Abbey and said, I cannot. Philomena is a great example of a heart remaining open in the midst of great suffering. unconditional, loving acceptance. Impossible, say many who have been so terribly hurt by life. But the scriptures tell us that it is possible. Jade Angelica and Philomena are both proof. God's grace is available to bring out the best in all of us, even in the most difficult situations.